Here's a chance for Keir Starmer to show he has a backbone, but I bet he'll bottle it. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch made a big show, calling Starmer a ditherer over defence spending at Prime Minister's Questions on Wednesday. That's June 11, 2026, for those who want to remember it, because there is a shortfall between the defence budget and a much delayed investment plan. She wants Starmer to cut the benefits budget, just axe payments to vulnerable people willy-nilly, in order to find the £28 billion the Ministry of Defence says it needs over the next 4 years. And his own Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has apparently said she doesn't want the government to borrow the money. But why should Starmer pay it at all? There are multiple reasons for him not to. Firstly, this is a problem created by Conservative governments. They created the funding gap by continually underfunding the Ministry of Defence during their years in office between 2010 and 2024. Admittedly, it seems there is no single figure showing what the MOD wanted compared with what it got across the whole 2010 to 24 period. Defence budgets were agreed annually and requirements changed continually. The clearest figure I have seen comes from the National Audit Office's examination of the MOD's 2023 to 33 equipment plan, published while the Conservatives were still in office. The watchdog found that planned equipment and support programmes would cost £305.5 billion over the following decade, while the available budget was only £288.6 billion, leaving a gap of £16.9 billion. It described the plan as unaffordable and said this was the largest deficit since the equipment plan process began in 2012, implying that plenty of other deficits had also been incurred during the 11-year period leading up to that point. The Tories' response was to scrap the equipment plan process, as reported by the BBC. The same report found that costs had risen by £65.7 billion compared with the previous year's plan, while the budget had risen by only £46.3 billion. In other words, requirements were growing faster than funding, and the biggest increases came from nuclear and naval programmes, whose costs had risen by £54.6 billion. The nuclear programme alone increased by £38.2 billion, and the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee later identified the nuclear deterrent as the biggest contributor to the affordability crisis. The nuclear programme has been funded from the MOD budget since 2010, another Tory decision, and the BBC article refers to a parliamentary report stating that spiralling costs of maintaining the UK's nuclear weapon system were the largest cause of the equipment plan shortfall. So, if Badenoch argues that Starmer should simply find the money, Labour could reasonably reply that he wouldn't have to if the Tories had been more responsible with the national finances between 2010 and 2024. Secondly, the public don't want defence spending to increase any further. Only 37% of Britons currently say defence spending should be increased, even if it requires higher taxes, borrowing, or spending cuts elsewhere, according to the findings of a new Ipsos poll. 40% say spending should stay where it is, and 15% think it should be reduced. Support for increased spending has fallen 11 percentage points since March, from 48%. The really important findings emerge when people are asked about trade-offs. 50%, half of them, oppose higher defence spending if it means paying more tax themselves. 45% oppose it if it means cuts to other public services. Only 3% support increasing the basic rate of income tax, or VAT, to fund defence. 38% oppose cuts to any public services to pay for it. So, while many people support a strong military In principle, enthusiasm falls sharply when specific funding mechanisms are proposed. The only circumstances in which a majority of the public would welcome increased spending is if it yielded clear civilian advantages. So 73% support increases that generate jobs and apprenticeships, and 61% back investments in critical civilian infrastructure. These figures create a problem, not only for Starmer, but also for Badenoch. Her suggestion that benefit spending should be scrapped to fund defence does align with the finding that welfare is the service most commonly selected for cuts. But at 27%, that is still only a little over a quarter of the public, while a much larger group says no services should be cut at all. Finally, and perhaps most significantly, it seems the strongest pressure is coming from the UK's NATO allies, foreign countries. But they are demanding a spending increase for selfish reasons. It would help them more than us, especially as they are not doing what they want us to do. The old NATO defence spending target was at least 2% of GDP, and the UK has actually been one of the better performers throughout this period. Government figures show the UK spent 2.33% of GDP on defence in 2024 and has met the NATO target every year since it was introduced. In contrast, many countries ignored the target for years. In 2023, only 10 NATO members were meeting it. By 2025, however, all 32 members were projected to reach it for the first time. But that was the year NATO leaders agreed a new framework that aims for 3.5% of GDP to go on core defence spending, plus another 1.5% on related security infrastructure by 2035. And here's the crucial point. Hardly anybody is meeting that new target either. As of last year's NATO figures, only 3 countries were already spending 3.5% or more on core defence: Poland, Lithuania and Latvia. Most NATO countries are still clustered around 2 to 3%. Even the United States was only around 3.2 to 3.4%. So it is hypocritical of most other NATO countries to demand that the UK spend more proportionately than them. So what's the solution? Perhaps in order to fund the future, we should look to the past. Historically, in periods of warfare or threat of war, governments have asked the people with the most to lose from the loss of security to pay the extra bills for it. During both World Wars, the UK dramatically increased taxes on high incomes, excess profits and wealthier sections of society in order to help finance the war effort. So the idea that those with the greatest resources should shoulder a larger share of exceptional national costs has deep roots in British history. The logic runs roughly as follows. Wealth is far more concentrated than income. The wealthiest individuals and corporations benefit disproportionately from the stability, legal system, infrastructure and security that the state provides. Therefore, if the state faces a major new security requirement, those who have accumulated the greatest wealth under that system should contribute more towards maintaining it. From that perspective, funding defence through wealth taxes, higher taxes on capital gains, dividends, inheritances, land values or windfall profits might seem more equitable than funding it through cuts to benefits or increases in taxes paid by ordinary workers. And today we have a super rich class of people who made their fortunes by buying up national assets as they were, stupidly, sold off by right-wing governments. Critics of privatisation say assets built up through public investment over generations were often sold at relatively low prices, allowing private owners and shareholders to extract substantial returns from what had previously been public property. If we accept that analysis, then asking them to contribute more towards national security can be presented as a form of reciprocity, tit for tat if you like. The counter-argument is usually that wealth and capital are mobile and that new taxes on wealthy individuals could discourage investment, encourage tax avoidance, or drive them overseas. But while the people can flee abroad, the assets cannot and may still be taxed. Also, fleeing abroad means these people would no longer be protected by the UK's defence forces, but would probably be living in a place with a far inferior capability. Wouldn't it be more sensible to stay in the UK, pay up, and have the best protection possible?